Bonjour, hi, I'm Sean Danielle, and this is my favorite book ever, Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Canadian classic. And when I say favorite book, I mean the whole series is collectively my favorite book. I have visited Green Gables on many occasions. My home fireplace has its own Gog and Magog. I named my dog Rilla, and I wrote a whole fringe play that I performed this last summer in places including Prince Edward Island, about a priest obsessed with Anne of Green Gables. However, what do you do when your favorite author hates you, or at least doesn't respect you very much? You see, in addition to being really into Anne of Green Gables and a big fan of Lucy Maud Montgomery, je suis Acadien. I'm Acadian, descended from the French speakers of Eastern Canada who have lived on Prince Edward Island longer than English speakers, though vastly outnumbered now, and still there, by the way. And it would be a dishonest portrayal of Prince Edward Island now, or at any point in its settled by European past, to not have Acadian characters, to not reflect that minority of the community. And the Anne of Green Gables series does portray us very badly. And it starts fast. It's within chapter 1, in fact. Marilla says in chapter 1, when discussing why she's adopting at all, there's never anybody to be had to help out but those stupid, half-grown little French boys. And as soon as you get one broken into your ways and taught something, he's off to the lobster canneries or the States. Okay, so we're introduced to the French-speaking community of Prince Edward Island by one of Canada's most beloved authors in the first chapter of her book, with Marilla calling us stupid, half-grown, needing to be broken, and the biggest fear being that we would run off to lobster canneries or the States. It's a little convicting because I mentioned I'm Acadian. I was born in the United States in a lobster fishing community. My ancestors were Marilla's greatest fear, I suppose. Okay, chapter 3, we get our next mention. And this is from Matthew, who is much gentler and, of course, says a lot less. I could hire a French boy to help me, said Matthew. That's it. So Matthew doesn't come with any judgment. In fact, he seems to believe that a French boy would be helpful. But he's still part of this culture of thinking of the servant class of his time and his place are the French, the Acadians. Now, we don't get any more Acadians till chapter 18, when we go to the Barrys' house, and Anne saves the day by saving Minnie May. It's a lovely anecdote, one of the highlights of the story, but Anne's heroic saving of Minnie May is contrasted with an Acadian being useless. Young Mary Jo, a buxom, broad-faced French girl from the Creek, whom Mrs. Barry had engaged to stay with the children during her absence, was helpless and bewildered, quite incapable of thinking what to do or doing it, if she thought of it. Now, there's no reason why any individual Acadian can't be stupid, but are you noticing the trend? Every Acadian is presumed to be useless and stupid. When we go to the second book of the series, Anne of Avonlea, Marilla's views on orphans have massively improved through exposure and through loving them. But her view of her Acadian neighbors is not growing in any way, shape, or form. She describes a hired hand. Martin's just like the rest of those French, said Marilla in disgust. " You can't depend on them for a day." It's an interesting thing with people's cultural bigotries, the chicken and egg scenario, because if you're treating everybody this way, is it a self-fulfilling prophecy? If you're this mean and judgmental as an employer, are you going to get people's best work? Probably not. The Barry family doesn't progress in its views either from one book to the next. Diana says, I've had serious thoughts of asking young Mary Jo to sit down and eat her tea with me. But I expect Grandma wouldn't approve. She says the French have to be kept in their place. Marilla tells her foster boy, Davy, that being treated the way that she treats the French is a punishment. Davy, if I ever catch you at such a trick again, you'll be made to wait for your meals till everyone else is done, like the French. Now, there's a clear trend here, right? The French exist, but they exist to serve and are treated with condescension. They are inferior. It would be dishonest for a Canadian author of her time period to portray wealthy, landowning Prince Edward Island English speakers as loving and treating the French as their equals. So, on one hand, it's good that this portrayal is here. It is good to show that the most vitriolic anti-French nonsense that I still get as comments on my TikToks and YouTube videos, it's not new. It's deeply ingrained in generations of English Canadians that they are better than the French. That we need to know our place. That we're unreliable. And it's a cyclical, self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, I don't want to show how Acadians are portrayed in all of the works of Lucy Maud Montgomery, just because I didn't want to do that research, but I did remember one instance from another series, Emily of New Moon, that I think is very revealing as well. So, Emily says, that's why... I'll begin again. Emily says, you see, Cousin Jimmy's got a lot of French boys to help plant the potatoes. I had help too, and Ilza, my friend, came to keep me company. And it was so annoying to hear those boys talking French when we couldn't understand a word of it. They did it just to make us mad. Such jabbering. No, they didn't. No, they didn't. But this is actually a really common trope amongst English-speaking Canadians, and I've seen parallel tropes with English-speaking Americans, to believe that the linguistic minority in your community is speaking their language to leave you out or to annoy you. They were speaking French because they are francophones, not to annoy a little girl named Emily, right? And I still see this in current Canada, in modern meetings, where if two francophones turn to each other and say something in French, we can be treated as if we are somehow attacking the English speakers who, incidentally, like Anne of Green Gables and Emily, have had French classes their whole lives. We're not doing it to leave them out. We're doing it because it's our language. And they don't have the self-awareness to realize that speaking English can be just as much an act of exclusion as speaking French, or the parallel in the United States, speaking Spanish. At the same time as all of these condescending remarks are being made by characters throughout these books about the French, the Acadians, the French language is treated with a certain degree of paradoxical respect. It is a prestigious subject in the schooling, and it's mentioned that doing well in French class is part of being a smart Canadian kid. And I still see this in the way that both English Canadians and Americans often speak about, studying abroad in France, or French language and culture. It has a certain prestige and cachet if it's Parisian, but when it comes to their own French-speaking neighbors, whether that's Quebecois or Acadians, or the Franco-American communities of northern New England, or the Cajun communities in the south near New Orleans, or immigrant African and Haitian communities across the United States and Canada, French then once again becomes a dirty thing. There's this inconsistent view. I do also want to say that all these portrayals do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Lucy Maud Montgomery. The opinions of characters are not necessarily the opinions of the author. And it's also really just always important to understand that portrayal is not endorsement in literature, right? Showing that something exists does not mean that the author thinks that it's good or bad, that they think that it is. And while Anne of Green Gables and Emily of New Moon are works of fiction, Prince Edward Island as a character is quite real and important to the books. And Prince Edward Island, with a minority Acadian community that everybody else is looking down upon, I think is an honest portrayal. Not a happy one, but an honest one. I wish my favorite author loved my community as much as I love her. To some extent, we can excuse some of this on her being of a past generation. But it bothers me so much because I don't want to overstate it, but I know that it's real. The attitudes portrayed in this book, I still hear from English-speaking Maritimers when I travel there now with Quebec license plate. And I hope when my children are a bit more grown to move to Prince Edward Island and probably live in an Acadian community. And obviously I can speak English, so I'm not going to have trouble integrating and getting things done with the English-speaking communities, but I am still going to say hi, I'm Jean Daniel. It also makes me wonder about what do we do with our heroes or even our own relatives who have offensive opinions. Well, I hope that we can still say they're offensive. I don't think the offensive views of Acadians mean that there's no worth or value in the writings of Lucy Maud Montgomery. They do mean, to me, that we should look at her literature as historic, as a snapshot in Canadian culture, and not necessarily as a nostalgic ideal of who we were at our best in some arbitrary past. There are problems with the way people in these books behave towards all kinds of communities. And there's deep humanity worth learning from. In Anne of Ingleside, Anne is an adult, and her daughter, Nan, is really excited to say au revoir to a friend, Dovie, and to have a chum with whom she can speak French. That's a long way. 2 generations. The attitude has moved on from Marilla's disgust to Anne just seeing French as a school subject to Nan seeing it as a way to make friends. À la prochaine.